Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm continuing my look at the Mighty Crusaders series from 1983 by Red Circle. This time I'm taking a look at issue number 3. I'm going to try to get these out a little more regularly, so we won't have as big a gap in between videos as I did the first and second issues. So let's take a look here at this issue. And so now on the inside front cover we've got letters that look like have started to come in talking about the book. And so we're starting off here with the Brain Emperor, again the villain, or one of the villains we've seen in the previous issues, kind of floating off in this sort of nebulous space. Our captions here say that he's kind of traveling between dimensions and that kind of thing, and this other character in the shadows here sees him as he fades away, and again, using some of the zipatone pattern that we saw used a lot in the second issue there. Again, sort of like a pre-digital kind of art effect there. Now we see the Brain Emperor here showing up on Eterno's satellite, and we've got the comet passed out here. And while he's sort of incapacitated, the Brain Emperor zaps him with this command that he's suggesting into his mind as Darkling, who is the other superheroine character here in the background, sees what's going on. We've got this real interesting panel here of Brain Emperor. I really kind of like the detail on that. I could kind of point out some of the Neil Adams influences on the last issue. This panel in particular just kind of feels more Joe Kubert to me, and I feel like we'll get a little bit more of that throughout the issue. And again, I'm pretty sure this is the same artist and everything working on this one, so it's kind of interesting seeing that kind of shift in the artwork on this one. Then we cut to the Shield meeting with a general here on an aircraft carrier who says that, you know, they're trying to attack the dome city of Atlantis, that Eterno has risen in the previous issues, and saying that at some point the government is going to nuke this thing because they can't penetrate it. They're flying over with aircraft, kind of bombing it. They're kind of doing bombing runs here on the city and aren't making a dent in it. So the plan is to nuke it if they can't come up with another solution. So again, kind of giving our heroes here a ticking clock for dealing with Eterno here and trying to stop his plan. We cut to inside the city, and we see Eterno here, who is lifeless at this point. So he has left his body and has taken control of the juggernauts that we saw in the last issue. I don't know if that was explicitly stated in the last issue or if I just missed it. So the sort of facsimiles of the heroes that were fighting in the last issue apparently are all under the direct control of Eterno. Like, he's placed his mind in all of them. And so here we finally get our title. So this is the final chapter of Atlantis Rising, the Darkling ingredient. And again, Darkling is the superhero we saw kind of in the shadows there with Brain Emperor. And so our credits on this issue are scripting, editing, and art by Rich Buckler, inks by Villigran. The Crusaders are starting to come around here, and Brain Emperor has shown up, and they realize they've all been transported to Atlantis. And then we have not really Hangman here, but really Eterno in the facsimile body, saying that he knows that Brain Emperor has been trying to defeat him. He knew, you know, about his betrayal the whole time and that kind of thing. And this is a nice panel here, too. I kind of want to point this one out, too. Just sort of the portrait here, sort of the line work, kind of adding some depth there, too. Just kind of a nice illustration here on that panel, that close-up. Now Brain Emperor is revealing that he has taken control of Atlantis and that Eterno is his creation. And Eterno now has kind of lost control of everything. It seems weird that Brain Emperor would have to work behind the scenes and betray Eterno if he was really in control of him the whole time. I don't know, this almost feels like kind of backsliding with the writing, like they decided to go a different direction maybe, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at the first two issues again to see if there's anything kind of hinting at that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head though. But again, it's sort of like a neat kind of twist here, especially when it looks like the heroes are so outnumbered by Eterno at this point. Then we have Shield taking a jet to kind of fly off and go fight with the fighter pilots, even though, you know, he might die. But it's like, what does he tell the other pilots that are risking their lives here to stop Atlantis? Now we have another shadowy figure showing up here, and it turns out it's the Comet. And since his encounter with Brain Emperor at the beginning of the issue, his powers have reverted to their original form. I'm not really sure what that means. There's a lot going on here for a book that's, in its third issue. I feel like they're relying on the reader to know a lot about the original version of these characters. There was a lot of intro stuff in the first issue and like different files and things at the end of the book, but I feel like a lot is put on the reader to know who these characters are already for a new series. And here Comet introduces Darkling to the team, and so she can teleport, so that looks like that's going to be pretty useful in what they're doing here. Then we've got Brain Emperor working with the Crusaders now to fight against the Juggernauts, and he keeps saying throughout the book that he needs the Crusaders on his side to kind of further his plans. But then again, if he's in control of Eterno, why do they even need to be fighting the Juggernauts? You think he could just kind of turn them all off. And here we've got the new shield kind of lashing out, trying to destroy the Juggernauts, and it says, that their bodies are indestructible here. So we get this big face-off, sort of like the previous issue, with the heroes fighting the other group of heroes. Seems like a weird way to introduce these other characters, too, that aren't part of the established Crusaders already. By having these evil duplicates in there. I feel like it would have had more impact had they already established those other heroes previously, maybe done a little bit of a surprise with the evil versions of them. I feel like it would have more weight to the reader and to the story. It just seems like a weird way to do that. I almost would have preferred them just to kind of create some more villains, maybe, that we could have used. I don't really get what you gain here from introducing the characters as evil duplicates, because then what happens if they show up later in the series, which I imagine they will. I would think we would get the sort of regular versions of these characters later on. Then we have Darkling kind of teleporting and saving the original shield away from here. And now we have Comet coming down, turning his disintegrator beam onto the Juggernauts, and a darkness falls over Atlantis. And we see it's the Comet's spaceship has shown up and is sort of creating like an eclipse over Atlantis, which is apparently solar powered. And so that is trouble for them. So Eterno's Juggernauts take off, and Brain Emperor has slipped away at some point too during the fight. Then the Crusaders return to the aircraft carrier, and Comet's spaceship starts taking Atlantis back out into space. And so what the plan is here is to throw it into the sun to get rid of it. Now we've got the Crusaders kind of reconvening here after the fight, and Comet kind of explains what happens to him, where Brain Emperor kind of put the suggestion in his head, and Comet's explaining how the Brain Emperor put the suggestion in his head and how it's altered his powers, and so he's gone back to his old costume here, which I think is way better than the one he started the series with. It was almost like a safari-looking outer space kind of outfit. And they decide to vote in Darkling as a new member of the Crusaders. And so Comet takes off, and they've kind of voted in Darkling to be a new member of the Crusaders. And that kind of wraps up our story here with the Atlantis Rising story. But we get a backup story here featuring the original Shield. And so this is by Martin Grime. It's kind of real blurry right there. There's sort of like a printing mistake over the letters there. And then we have art by Dick Ayers and Tony DeZuniga. So yeah, I like this better than the other kind of weird backup story we had in the previous issue. So, there's some crime going down on the docks. S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up and stops it. And it kind of looks like old school kind of 40s here, but this is in modern times. You find out over the course of the story. And so as S.H.I.E.L.D. breaks these guys up, we're introduced to this group called Delta, where it's 3 guys who are kind of manipulating things behind the scenes here. They're behind the incident at the docks that we just saw, and they're talking about sort of infiltrating the government and law agencies, and they're, noticing that, hey, we're going to have to deal with these Crusaders eventually, and they're creating their own sort of ultra beings, they say here. So we see these kind of creatures working out here in training. And then the third member shows up, and, they realize, hey, the S.H.I.E.L.D's who interrupted our plans. And so then they all kind of go back to their secret rooms, and it turns out they're all wearing masks, so they take off their masks and just kind of blend into the population in the street. And so then the story ends with the cops kind of figuring everything out at the docks, and they find a map that the criminals were after and this sort of badge that is the symbol of the shield. So I like this backup a lot more than what we had in the previous issue, because I don't feel like that had anything to do with the main title. This feels like they're setting up these villains that are going to show up later in the series, I would think. This is like a continuing story, though, they're saying, too, in the Shield, so we'll get more of this in the next issue, it looks like. But I feel like this is something that will have more consequences in the main story, too. And so here's the back cover. We've got the Darkling ingredient. And so just sort of like a teaser, almost like an alternate cover, I guess. Or is this... Oh, okay, so yeah, so this is playing off of the front cover, too. So here we have Eterno in the Hangman body saying, "I have destroyed the Crusaders." And then here on the back, we have Darkling saying, "Not until you have destroyed me." So kind of like two sides of the same shot there. That's kind of interesting. That's kind of a neat thing. So yeah, so that's the third issue of the Mighty Crusaders from 1983. Seems like pretty straightforward superhero stuff. Nothing too crazy here. I kind of like the idea of Eterno kind of inhabiting bodies. I think that makes him a more interesting character than just some chubby guy in a weird helmet. I feel like the Brain Emperor controlling Eterno, creating Eterno thing is kind of iffy. I feel like that's kind of tenuous. But I still want to stick with this and go through the rest of the series and see where they go. My biggest complaint right now is there's a lot of characters thrown in here, and I don't feel like everybody's getting equal time here. And, you know, we're bringing in Darkling now, too, like another character. We just introduced a bunch of heroes that weren't really the versions of the heroes that are real. You know, it's like, do we need this many characters? I know it's a team book, and I know these are the characters on the team, but I feel like there's a lot of moving parts here, and not everyone's getting equal time. So far, I think the biggest problem with the book is that it's relying on the readers to know too much about these characters already. And again, I'm pretty sure there's a decent publishing gap with these characters, so if you weren't a fan of this originally and know all these characters already, it's a little more confusing than it should be, especially for a book that's only on its third issue. And you can do some of that through file pages and stuff like that in the book, but it really needs to be on the page too with the story. There's just so many group kind of fight scenes that I feel like some characters are getting lost here. And again, I like independent sort of superhero comic universes that don't have a ton of backstory to them. You know, I don't need 80 years of baggage necessarily, but you got to give me something too. You got to give me some character development. You have to let me know who these characters are a little more, or I don't care. You know, you still need some of that to make a compelling story. So I like where this is going. Hopefully they kind of work out the kinks as we go. Let me know what you think of the story so far. Have you read these books? I don't know where you can really read these right now unless you have the back issues. Again, I don't think these are like too pricey or anything like that if you want to hunt them down. But yeah, let me know, you know, what you think of the series so far, or what you think of these characters. Like, I was first introduced to these characters through the Impact Comics line at DC. So let me know in the comments below what your history is with these characters. And come back next time for issue 4. And thanks for watching. If you'd like to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter/X at Detective651. Also on Instagram at Detective651. Be sure to check out my t-shirt store at tpublic.com/user/Detective651. I've got a lot of nerdy designs on there, and there's sales all the time, so check it out frequently.